All right. Well, welcome to another episode of Click Happens. My name is Doug Kreitzberg, CEO of CPod Cyber, and I'm joined as usual by Kyle Sadi, who's Chief Revenue Officer and EVP of Underwriting for CPod, and Sinclaire Morris, who's there will be a title change. Just giving you a little hint down the road once we figure that out. But she heads up our MSP partnership. So. Good to see you both, Kyle and Sinclaire. And I understand last week you guys just went ahead and did a podcast. I'm sure it was the best one. I wasn't there, but how did it go? I haven't yet had a chance to take a look at it yet.
Do you know technically history was made last week? It was the first, I believe. I haven't been here since the beginning of CPod, but the first podcast at CPod without Doug. So it was a little sad. But we tried to bring the messaging forward, and we had a good discussion. I don't know, Sinclaire, what'd you think?
I thought it was good. I mean, you were missed for sure, but but I thought it was good.
Oh shucks. There. Well, great. Well, I'm not sure what I was doing last week, but I'm back, and we were just talking. Kyle was talking that we're beyond busy. And you know that so there's so much busyness that, and then you go beyond it. It's like, is that when you're pushing through outer space and you've just released one of the rocket stages, you push beyond the atmosphere? What is beyond busy, Kyle?
It's when my brain can't think of the right words because I'm so busy. I think that's what it is. And okay. To be clear, it's good busy. It's good busy.
It's good business.
Helping a lot of clients, a lot of folks, all of that. So
right, and we deal with a lot of certainly businesses, managed service providers, and they and it could be maybe because we're talking insurance, but when we talk to them, invariably they are busy as well, and you would think with all the tools and the technology we have. I mean, if you actually believed everything about AI that you read, you would think that none of us should be busy. We should all just be sitting back while our avatars are doing all the work. Why isn't that happening yet, Sinclaire?
I knew where this conversation was going. I knew it was leading into AI. It's a process. And, AI still needs human supervision.
It requires supervision. That is true. That is true.
Can I mention something on AI, Doug?
Yeah.
I had a nice moment last night. So as we've talked about, like culture, accepting AI and all of that. And last night in my household, I had my wife for the first time really use AI for her work. And she was like blown away, and she's doing some really detailed presentation. And it's fun to see when people like hit that where they're really starting to use it.
That's right.
Just like, how did I never use this before? So we had that
right.
Sold, which was
right.
Fun.
That's right. That's right. And you may have to coach her that she's going to feel there's that once you start learning it, the excitement. So the slope that just builds. And then you're going to get to a point where you realize AI is that child that you have to pay attention to, and you just can't leave it on its own because you come back and everything's destroyed. And you go through that trough of despair that it isn't that they still need upbringing. But then once you recognize how you need to work with it, you then can start being productive again. So when she may hit that trough of despair, but just to keep, it's just like with a child. You just have to. You can't throw them out, obviously. You gotta work with them, and they'll come around. They'll come around there. But we're not despairing on this show today. We were talking right before we came on that a lot of cybersecurity, a lot of cyber insurance, is that kind of or tries to sow that seeds of fear, uncertainty, doubt. And it's hard to kind of keep away from it. I remember when I sold life insurance, it's tough to sell life insurance without talking about the concept of what happens, when you're not there, right? And so similarly with something like with any insurance, but cyber insurance, you're talking about bad things happening, but there are some good things that are happening. I think that maybe we can focus on, and one of them, I just want to talk about is ransomware. Ransomware isn't going away, but it's kind of that, it's a known now. In other words, it's a risk that we know, and we know how to deal with it. And to a certain extent, although I'm sure that there's still opportunities on the actuarial side, we know how to kind of manage it from a risk standpoint, risk financing standpoint there. And so Kyle, can you kind of talk us, just talk a little bit about, you brought a little bit of history perhaps on the ransom, but that it kind of it didn't really come out of nowhere, but it seemed to, but why we may be more comfortable about it, even though it's still a big risk here, but why should we feel a little positive about that?
Yeah, I remember when. I remember it was 2019, and I was actually getting coffee with a broker. I was at a traditional cyber insurance carrier, and I had a large client, a large publicly traded client, and I got a phone call. And at that point, in that time period, like ransomware, it wasn't really a big thing. Like ransomware has been around forever, but it wasn't weaponized against any industry. And I'll never forget what happened with this client was it was a dual extortion where not only did they encrypt their data and they couldn't get access to it and they were asking for a certain amount of money, but they actually exfiltrated their litigation strategy and were demanding that. And I was just like, whoa. And that was an industry class that at the time cyber underwriting was considering like a low hazard because they didn't have that much data. But like you flip the script quickly and you're like a litigation strategy. Well, how much is the lawsuit? Make a number up and now you know what the extortion is. So that to me was the time period when it really took off and they were able to kind of use it against any industry class, which changed the whole dynamic of the insurance marketplace. Doug, you were mentioning something earlier on, which before this, which I thought was really, punctual for this conversation, which was maturity. And I think what's happened is obviously, unfortunately, the maturity of the ransomware attacks have been there for quite some time, but the rest of the marketplace around ransomware attacks has also matured. And I think that means a couple different things. Like, yes, insurance coverage, making sure the right coverage is there. But I think that's adoption of the right cybersecurity controls by clients and more mainstream. And I think that's also vendors that help like react to and deal with ransomware attacks. So whether that's the extortion negotiator, which is a proper company that does that actually talks to the threat actors and does that, whether that's the company that helps with the backups, which are hopefully immutable, right, and all of that piece, the forensic investigation, all of those things, everybody kind of knows now what to do. And then back to kind of where you were going with many more clients are better secure today. And the way it was explained to me early days, which I always like to go back to, is like, if you look at a ransomware attack, you kind of look at it as a three-story shop, which is email security, internal security, and then backup and recoveries. And when you fill in like what procedures, what kind of controls you need within that, it's pretty well known at this point. So again, it's not that, like you said, ransomware is here to stay. It's still going to be an issue. I think we're seeing from a lot of reports that there's less claims being paid, that sort of thing. Now, I want to clarify, less extortions being paid. That doesn't necessarily mean there's less cost to the insured. If you go down and you don't have right backups, you might have business interruption or contingent business. So sometimes the cost just switches. But for those clients that have those right controls and have listened to the advice of their MSPs and others, they're in much better shape.
Right. And Sinclaire, from the standpoint of MSPs and even the businesses that you work with here, is, do you feel that everyone kind of understands what to do about ransomware and how to protect themselves, that it's kind of one of those known quantities and we've got good solid ways to approach ransomware? Or is it still kind of, an issue that MSPs are struggling to get their clients to adopt at least some of the controls?
I mean, the MSPs that we work with, I think have a pretty good handle on ransomware. Increasingly, I'm hearing, that MSPs are just their clients get MDR, managed detection and response, and that's just what it is. And we have seen a shift in ransomware. It used to be encryption first, now it's exfiltration first, and so it's not quite as easy to detect with your typical endpoint detection and response. It's more about like behavior and login activity, identity access. So I think, and like what Kyle said, those three elements, email, endpoint or monitoring, and then also backup solutions. I think our MSPs do have a pretty good handle on that. I think it's scary that now it's exfiltration first, because that could mean something is there and you might not know about it for a little while. But
Right. That is true, and I think too from the from the carrier standpoint or the insurance community standpoint, it's a known quantity in terms of pricing risk of the underwriting is, I wouldn't say it's consistent, but we do have the you do have the opportunity to. It's known what controls you really should have in place to make sure that you're protected, and from a carrier standpoint, how to underwrite to that there. I think and the other area that in terms of the what's being done, what is known or what's being some transitions that are working out pretty well is along the same lines is a lot of these controls are now boring. And when I say boring, not that they don't work. In fact, we all know that they work and we all know what should be in place. And multi-factor authentication, backup you talked about, endpoint detection and response. These again are known controls. And fortunately, a lot of businesses are beginning to pick up on it in most situations there. Sinclair, when you talk with our partners or talking with MSPs, do you see that their baseline controls are often meeting those boring control criteria that can lead to good underwriting decisions from an insurance standpoint?
Yeah, I definitely do. I mean, there's a few exceptions to that, but for the most case, I think a lot of MSPs are, like I mentioned, with the managed detection and response, SOC with 24/7 monitoring, they go hand in hand. But even like a SIM solution, so like audit logging, they're looking at these hardening security deployments, and the baseline controls, the ones that you mentioned and the ones a lot of carriers are looking for are kind of at this point just expected. If you're a business operating, you have these minimum things in place.
Right. And Kyle, do you see that too as reviewing applications for underwriting? Are you seeing most of these controls in place?
Pleasantly surprised, yes. I still think there's adoption needed, but I also think there's potential additional liability these days if you're not going the route of securing yourself. There might be specific industries, but for example, healthcare, like healthcare has to adhere with HIPAA and OCR violations, and I've certainly seen in the past where a healthcare entity, for example, might have a breach. They notify OCR, Office of Civil Rights, and they might get a slap on the wrist. But then if they have that same type of breach down the road, it's a pretty big fine, because at that point they knew what they needed to do to protect themselves and protect the data. And you could think about that for other industry classes. Like we were actually talking to a client this morning, has a lot of records from a PCI perspective. And it's the same thing. They're in good shape. They work actually with one of our partners, and they're completely PCI certified. But more than that, they're like top tier kind of controls. But I've certainly seen similar situations where, again, if a company's just not investing right, it can open them up for additional exposure.
Right, right. Absolutely. There. And the I would say, when we say it's boring, it's we have to be careful, or I have to remind myself, I could be thinking, I could be seeing this all within a bubble, right? Because I just talk to people who are about security and cyber insurance, and we all kind of see the same things because we're all thinking the same thing. So it's all boring to us. The good news about being boring, if you don't have multi-factor, if you don't have an EDR solution, if you don't have, which could be a lot of small businesses, quite frankly, who just haven't got the memo because nobody's been able to get give them the memo yet. There are taking those steps to become secure isn't a huge lift. There are organizations, we work with many MSPs who know how to do this and can put those in place. And quite frankly, the business shouldn't be thinking about security. They should be assuming that, well, they shouldn't assume, never assume, but they should be working with an MSP who's just taking care of it for them, or working with a qualified IT security professional there with regards to it here. And if so, hopefully the conversations start becoming less about what CIS controller are you using, or what's your RDP and SMB and DNS and MIC KEY and all that stuff, and more talking about things that the businesses do understand, which are the dollars. How am I protecting myself, my balance sheet? What's the financial risk here to me of this, and how am I addressing it? And a lot of it's coming. We're beginning to see from the MSP space, from those that are getting into compliance, taking on the compliance mantle, and taking on what would be called a virtual chief information security officer role, in which they can work with an organization. They may have their own IT team, but they don't have the expertise on security, and they can't afford, to pay for one person to be there full time doing all that. They hire that out. But it's helping to turn the conversations from a purely technical one to a business one, because these MSPs are now speaking to the business owner in their language, not the language of tech as much there. And Sinclaire, from the work that you do with MSPs, how is that beginning to change? Are you seeing that with MSPs, that some of them are beginning to try to position themselves more as consultants for their clients here?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think it goes back to what you were saying about the baseline controls aren't necessarily boring, and like you said, we might see this through a bubble because of the businesses and MSPs that we work with, but it's a very important translation that's happening, because executives and boards, they're not thinking in controls, they're thinking in financial impact, downtime, insurability, liability, compliance. So when MSPs change the conversation, and I do think they have, away from these baseline controls that at this point are kind of table stakes, into broader business concepts.
Right. And Kyle, from the worked a lot, obviously on the carrier side. I worked with a lot of brokers. Do you find, And obviously there's very good brokers who understand cyber risk and understand the cost of risk in that domain there. Is that still, is the insurance community kind of getting up to speed, you think, with regards to the conversations from a financial standpoint about this risk?
I think yes, from a financial standpoint, they are. I think when you go back to the controls, they've also, I really believe the insurance industry has really helped the clients in the market kind of drive what's needed because it's a back effect. And right, we talk about that all the time with our partnerships. Quite often MSPs will utilize our reports and discussions to help a client understand how the financial impact can help them if they're purchasing the right technology and then getting the impact on the coverage as well. There's another part of the market which is interesting, which I go back and forth with. There are some companies out there that are just saying, we're not going to invest and we're going to gamble and we're going to have low controls, but we do want to purchase insurance. And there are some brokers that focus on those clients as well. And I go back and forth because I'm like, well, they do still deserve coverage. It's just they're going to have to pay a lot more. The coverage might be sublimited, that sort of thing. So there's that element of the market too.
Right. That's right. Not everyone's going to buy into even boring here. There's a health, actually, I don't know if they're health insurance. I forget an insurance company that is being sued in the state of New York, and they're for cyber breach incident, and where their COO was on record as saying, we have a high tolerance for cyber risk, and they're willing to take that on. Now they may have to pay a lot because of that high tolerance in terms of regulatory fines and whatever else is there, and so that's a decision that you can make there. I think for when we think about, and we work a lot within the small business community here, it's we're a small business ourselves, and it's very difficult to focus on things other than your core business. If you want to grow, if you want to keep happy customers, if you want to continue to take care of your business, for you to think about things that are outside of it really requires energy that you often don't have or don't prefer not to spend. And cyber is one of them. And I keep going back to that's where the managed service provider really provides a core value. If they're doing it right in terms of really being that risk manager, that business process analyst, the solution provider, navigator, if you will, to that business with regards to things from a technology standpoint. So that business person or that business group can kind of focus on doing what they need to do to create value for their customers here. And in that context, if I talk to a small business owner and they said, I don't know anything about cyber risk, but I just do what my MSP is telling me to do, that's not a bad thing. Hopefully they're working with a good MSP, and that's the only thing. Does that make sense? Or Sinclair?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think, kind of going back to what Kyle mentioned, increasingly we're seeing MSPs who have assumed this role, right, of being a risk advisor and having business conversations rather than just IT control conversations. Now they're being pulled into insurance conversations. And that's not one where MSP's expertise lies. It's a regulated industry and they don't want to deal with that either, but it's a very important element to a risk management strategy in 2026. So it's nice that they can offload those conversations to us who are experts in cyber insurance and are happy to take that weight off of their shoulders so they can do what MSPs do, which is a lot.
Right. And Kyle, the as the underwriter here, what are you hoping that the MSPs are doing on behalf of the businesses that you're underwriting? What there, and if there were certain criteria that you would say to a business, this is what you want to see from your MSP, what would they be?
Yeah, I'll come back to that last question. I think the best case scenario, and it kind of alludes to what Sinclaire was talking about. We'll get on the phone with the potential client, and we'll be on the phone with that potential client and the MSP or the cybersecurity firm. And it's quite nice because, as you said, Doug, there is the client sometimes just doesn't know that much and therefore is really leaning on the expert, the MSP or the cybersecurity firm. And then they're relying on us on the insurance. And even this morning, I mentioned about a call where we had a potential client that has a lot of credit card transactions. And so I asked some really tailored, specific PCI questions, like, do you have point-to-point encryption? What's your PCI certification level? There's just some questions in there that really are kind of focused. And the client didn't know, but luckily effectively the advisor knew. Was like, oh yeah, of course we have that. Yep, you got that. Blah blah blah. So you can see how important that is when you have both of those advisors and kind of helping the client move forward with their protection. And then just kind of your last question on the minimums. I really hope that when I think of some really basic minimums, I think of MFA across the board in all areas, including any remote connection. That's most important. I think we're at a point where at minimum you need an EDR solution, and then you get more advanced to like MXDR and things like that. Obviously backup recoveries with immutable being they can't be tampered with. We're at that point now. Those are some of the key ones just right off the top of my head. And I find that if organizations have even those three things, they're probably doing the rest of everything right. So if the MSP is focusing a client in that space, then you can go down the list of what seems like smaller things, but are still really important, like incident response. There's a whole wealth of them, but that's kind of where my head goes.
Interesting. Okay. All right. Great. Here. Well, we're in that beyond busy stage where we've still been able to kind of be in the zone of communicating risk and talking about risk. And I really appreciate your time, Kyle Sinclaire, for coming together here. And hopefully when you break through the beyond risk, when you're beyond busy, beyond busy.
I forgot at this point what I said. So
yeah, I know.
I've come down now.
Okay. Well, when you get to the other side of it, I hope it's all green grass and butterflies and sunshine here. So and the same for you if you're watching as well. Look forward to seeing you next week, and stay safe and stay warm. For those of us that are not perhaps right now. Take care.
Thanks.
Yep. Bye-bye.